After being sworn in, President Trump declared, quote, America's decline is over, also telling a bipartisan crowd he intends to be a unifier. Trump spoke about the assassination attempt against him in July, saying he was saved by God to make America great again. He's already signed a blizzard of executive orders and will soon sign more in the Oval Office, including a declaration of a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border and an order renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. All this unfolded as former President Joe Biden departed Washington after issuing last-minute pardons for his 3 younger siblings and 2 of their spouses. An extraordinary move there. It should be noted that none of them have been charged with crimes. Biden said he was protecting them from partisan attacks. We have a lot of ground to cover, and CBS's Nancy Cordes is going to lead us off tonight from the White House. Good evening, Nancy.
Good evening, Nora. Here at the White House, the changing of the guard is already complete. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will spend their first night here tonight. The moving vans arrived today as soon as the Bidens left. In his inaugural address, Trump did say he wanted to be a unifier, but he slammed the government as radical and corrupt and called the last 4 years a horrible betrayal.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
The nation's 47th president was sworn in at 12:01 p.m., with Chief Justice John Roberts administering the oath, just as he did 8 years ago.
So help me God.
J.D. Vance was sworn in by Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, becoming the 3rd youngest vice president ever.
That I will bear true faith.
With every living president looking on, President Trump condemned the past 4 years and declared this the start of a golden age.
America's decline is over.
He said the election gave him a mandate to dramatically remake government, starting today.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. We will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
Roughly 800 people squeezed into the Capitol Rotunda, forced inside by frigid temperatures. Among Trump's invited guests, a row of tech titans who were seated in front of his cabinet picks. Trump described his win as divine intervention.
Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. I was saved by God to make America great again.
20,000 supporters watched on the big screen from an arena nearby as busloads of Trump aides got busy at the White House and quickly took over the White House website. There were striking moments today. The departing president and first lady welcoming the Trumps to the White House this morning and riding with them to the Capitol. Transfer of power traditions that did not take place 4 years ago when an angry Trump left early.
2020, by the way, that election was totally rigged. But
in an unscripted speech to supporters this afternoon, Trump made it clear he is still nursing some grievances.
Liz Cheney is a disaster. She's a crying lunatic and crying Adam Kinzinger. He's a super crying. I never saw the guy not crying.
In a third speech this evening, Trump said he will be issuing pardons for January 6 defendants tonight in the Oval Office. Also tonight, Marco Rubio just became the first of Trump's nominees to be confirmed by the Senate. It was unanimous. He is now Secretary of State. Tomorrow, on his first full day in office, Trump will be meeting with congressional leaders here at the White House, the Republicans at least. And then, Nora, he is expected to head to North Carolina and Los Angeles on Friday to visit disaster zones. His first flights on Air Force One in 4 years.
47th President Donald Trump, who continues to spar with reporters and take questions inside the Oval Office while signing a raft, that is the best way to describe it, of executive actions and orders. Also, as we were coming into this event in the Oval Office, 1,500 pardons were signed by President Trump, 6 commutations for those who have pled guilty or have been convicted by a jury of their peers for offenses related to the Capitol riot, January 6, 2021. Also, the president said that on February 1st, he said approximately, that would be the time he thought it would be proper to impose tariffs of up to 25% on Canada and Mexico. He also talked at great length about what he may or may not do with TikTok and its threatened ban under federal law. He also talked at length about trying to figure out a way to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, and saying for the first time that Vladimir Putin is destroying Russia, harming its economy, and hollowing out its military, or words to that effect. Also, several executive orders signed about declaring an emergency on the southern border and with American energy production.
By the stroke of his Sharpie, President Trump today ushered in new and old policy and ideas.
Could you imagine Biden doing this? I don't think so.
Back is drilling in federally controlled parts of Alaska.
There are only two genders, male and female.
President also restoring federal policy recognizing just male and female as genders, and ending a Biden-era Option X on federal paperwork. He's also calling most federal employees nationwide back to the office, ending COVID-era work-from-home programs. On immigration and border security,
All illegal entry will immediately be halted.
the president is restarting construction of the U.S.-Mexico border wall. And in a step he considered but didn't take last time, Trump is ordering certain international gangs and drug cartels be classified as foreign terrorist organizations. Federal agencies can now arrest and remove members of gangs like Tren de Aragua and MS-13.
As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions.
And Trump is going to try, through executive order, to end birthright citizenship. It's a constitutional right that those born on American soil are U.S. citizens, regardless of their parents' immigration status. But it's one of several Trump orders set to face legal challenges. At least 4 federal suits filed in Washington today seek to block Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, arguing DOGE is too secretive and designed to benefit the president's billionaire backers, like Elon Musk, who's set to run the project.
A short time from now, we are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
And that's a plan Mexico's president has said her country won't recognize. Finally, after saying he didn't like that U.S. flags were set to fly at half-staff on Inauguration Day because of the recent death of former President Jimmy Carter,
flags shall be flown at full mast.
Trump signed paper ordering flags always fly at full staff on future Inauguration Days.
And Ed O'Keefe is here with us. Now, let's explain this. Just because the president signs an executive order, does that mean all of the action will be carried out?
Not necessarily, for a few reasons. First of all, as we mentioned, there are going to be a suite of lawsuits about various elements of what he's proposing tonight, whether it's the climate agenda, whether it's the immigration aspects, whether it's some of the government management stuff he's proposing. We mentioned, for example, concerns about DOGE. The other thing is, it may sound like something big, but it may actually not be that big a deal, or it might be rather perfunctory, in that when you come into a new administration, you say, everyone stop what you're doing until we have full control. Well, that happens every 4 or 8 years when a new president comes in anyway. Finally, there are congressional Republicans not pleased with some of what he did today. For example, Alaska's 2 senators, they want to keep the name of the mountain, Diwali, and not switch it back to Mount McKinley, because Alaska natives had said they wanted it changed. And there are others concerned about some of the changes he might try to make unilaterally on like electric vehicle mandates. So we'll see how much of it actually ever gets implemented.
And in an overnight move that seems to have caught much of Washington by surprise, the president fired the inspectors general, the title for top in-house watchdogs, from a number of federal agencies. With so much to cover, CBS's Willie James Inman is with the president in Las Vegas. Willie James, good evening.
Good evening to you, Nancy. As members of President Trump's cabinet are confirmed by the U.S. Senate, behind the scenes, the White House is making swift overnight changes to the federal workforce.
In a move that has caused bipartisan backlash, the Trump administration fired government watchdogs from a number of agencies overnight. In a letter obtained by CBS News, the now fired Inspector General of the Small Business Administration said that he believes the actions taken are not legally sufficient.
He seems to be trying to throw a monkey wrench into the kind of any independence left on our governments.
Under law, Congress must be given a 30-day heads up, along with a detailed explanation about the removal of an Inspector General. In a statement, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said he would like further explanation from President Trump. The drastic shift is part of a flurry of executive action during President Trump's first few days in office, which also include the removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The White House now says agencies should terminate DEI employees within 60 days.
The yeas are 59, the nays are 34, The nomination is confirmed.
Meanwhile, the president's cabinet is starting to take shape, with former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem confirmed by the Senate this morning to serve as DHS Secretary. And Pete Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense after a tie-breaking vote late Friday night.
I want to thank the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. It is the honor of a lifetime, sir, to serve under you.
And Nancy, CBS News has learned that the Army has told units to prepare for possible deployment in anticipation of numbers at the U.S. southern border ramping up in the next 24 to 48 hours. Nancy?
Willie James Inman, thank you.
In his opening remarks in the White House briefing room today, President Trump said the mid-air collision over the Potomac River was a dark night in our nation's history. Moments later, he shifted blame with, as he later acknowledged, no evidence to support it, suggesting the Democrats, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, might somehow be to blame.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before.
Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. During that presentation, Nancy, as you know, you were in the front row. President Trump went to great lengths to read from an FAA website. Can you convey to the audience the history of what he was talking about and how long that particular language had actually been on the FAA website?
Sure. He started arguing, Major, that under the Biden administration, the FAA had sent out a directive ordering FAA officials to hire people with severe disabilities. And he started listing out the various nature that these severe disabilities could take. Someone who was an amputee, someone who was severely intellectually disabled, and on and on. I was surprised by this. I actually started looking it up right there in the front row to see if there was anything to this. And it turns out, as reporters who were also doing the same thing I was, actually pointed out to the president in that press conference, this is a directive that has been on the FAA website since 2013. So it also encompassed the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. And in fact, it went beyond the FAA to other government agencies as well, talking about the goal of hiring people with severe disabilities, not necessarily for positions like air traffic controller, but for lower level positions. So it doesn't appear that what he was talking about had anything to do with the Biden administration specifically, which he was blaming, and also didn't have anything to do with the crash because it did not apply to the air traffic controllers who were in the tower, and it certainly didn't apply to the pilots who were flying either the regional jet or the Black Hawk helicopter.
And Nancy, it also creates the implication that whomever was hired by the FAA as an air traffic controller would not have to go through the same rigorous training procedure to become an air traffic controller.
Right. You know, I've been talking to air traffic control representatives, to congressional offices, and other experts all day long to try to figure out what President Trump is talking about when he says that the standards were high during his administration, but lower during Biden and Obama's administrations. And they simply can't point to any evidence that the standards have meaningfully changed. In fact, what they told me is that the standards for air traffic controllers have actually always been quite high, and the training program quite onerous. It lasts for 2 to 4 years. A lot of people end up dropping out. In fact, the challenge typically for years, right up until today, isn't that the standards aren't high enough, but that there are shortages because people who are skilled enough to make it to become an air traffic controller, they can probably make a lot of money in higher paying jobs. And so, you know, they say that the fact that President Trump is somehow pinning this on DEI simply doesn't bear out. And even President Trump acknowledged himself today that he really doesn't know whether the race or gender of the pilots or the air traffic controllers had anything to do with what we saw last night.
We begin this morning with President Trump's shocking proposal for the future of Gaza. He wants the U.S. to take ownership and rebuild the war-torn territory. Now, these comments came during a news conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday at the White House. But this plan would involve displacing more than 2 million Palestinians in order to build the, quote, Riviera of the Middle East.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is at the White House for us this morning following this development. Natalie, what exactly is President Trump's plan? How would this be accomplished?
Errol, the president was asked during that news conference last night what authority he has to take over Gaza, and he did not offer specifics. He also said, that he studied this closely for months, but again, no details last night. And he noted that Middle Eastern leaders have praised the idea but didn't name names. And it's notable that previously, when it was talked about to relocate Palestinians, some 2 million Palestinians to other countries, that a joint statement of several Arab leaders pushed back against that idea. Again, we're still getting a lot of reaction, but we do have a new statement from Saudi Arabia saying that its position on the establishment of a Palestinian state is firm and that it will not establish diplomatic ties with Israel without that. Keep in mind, Errol, we are talking about a disputed conflict zone here, and for decades, this has been a flashpoint in the Middle East.
X, are you okay? This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
And he's got this, check out this cool chain he's got.
I'll ask Elon Musk to say a few words, and we'll take some questions. Elon, go ahead.
Sure. So at a high level, if you say what is the goal of DOGE, and I think a significant part of the presidency is to restore democracy. This may seem like, well, aren't we in a democracy? Well, if you don't have a feedback loop, okay, X, we would have to, if you sorry. So, I tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes. If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. Everyone's very quiet, by the way. So are people normally this quiet?
Your detractors, Mr. Musk.
What?
Including a lot of Democrats.
I have detractors?
You do, sir.
I don't believe it.
Say that you're orchestrating a hostile takeover of government and doing it in a non-transparent way. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, you couldn't ask for a stronger mandate from the public. The public voted. We have a majority of the public voting for President Trump. We've won the House. We won the Senate. The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that. That was on the campaign. The president spoke about that at every rally. The people voted for major government reform, and that's what the people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for.
Mr. Musk, you said on X that an example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza. But after fact-check this, apparently Gaza in Mozambique, and the program was to protect them against HIV. So can you correct the statements? It wasn't sent to Hamas, actually. It was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you say?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes. I'm not sure we should be sending $50 million worth of condoms to anywhere, frankly. I'm not sure that's something Americans would be really excited about. And that is really an enormous number of condoms, if you think about it. But if it went to Mozambique instead of Gaza, I'm like, okay, that's not as bad, but still, why are we doing that?
Major, when you listen to what they're talking about, cutting waste, restoring democracy.
Sure.
I'm going to read a little bit more of what they said. With competence and caring, you can cut the budget deficit in half. If we do that, there's no inflation in 2026. All of this sounds very good. It would be hard to argue with what they're saying, but it really takes away the reality of the situation. USAID workers cut off from pay and insurance, food stuck in warehouses going rotten, people in clinical trials that are now in limbo because those have ended. Do you agree?
Absolutely. All of those are practical realities of immediately stopping federal payments to various agencies and federal workers, some in the United States, some recipients of research grants, some being cared for by those medical research grants, as you just indicated, and some Americans in very dangerous hotspots around the world working for USAID who don't know if they can even come back home, if they will have a job, health care, all these uncertainties. So, yes, the American people had a referendum on government reform. President Trump won that referendum. He is entitled to exercise some manner of control over the executive branch. There is nothing illegal about that, and there is something potentially politically valuable in doing that. And scrubbing the vast network of federal payments is probably long overdue. But when you get down to the specifics, like Elon Musk was just asked about something President Trump said repeatedly last week. First, it was $50 million in condoms to Hamas. Then it was $100 million.
Right.
That is completely false. 100% false. It was never true. And Elon Musk just said, oh, well, we'll sometimes make mistakes. Right. That wasn't a mistake. That was an intentional effort to say, look at all that we've found that is so horrifying. And when you dig down deeper, it's not nearly what was described. And if that's consistent with how these efforts are going to be described, President Trump said again, hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, if that falsehood last week is representative of what they're finding and they're misleading the public about, then we need to be much more cautious about the assertions and the guarantees of transparency that, on closer inspection, may not actually bear out.
I'm glad you mentioned that as well, saying, okay, what does it matter if it goes to Gaza or Mozambique? Either way, it's not good. And also interesting to note that Elon Musk was asked about conflicts of interest in terms of the government contracts he had, and the response was essentially, people won't be shy about that. So no clear answers on the checks and balances there. But, Major, I did want to ask you also, we know that we have a three-branch of government system. Elon Musk, the president was asked, do you think you'll need a vote in Congress to make DOGE cuts? And the president said, I don't know. But how would a judge want to hold us back? And also saying we'd have the votes, essentially saying that the executive branch should have unilateral authority to make these changes.
Lindsay, I'm not a White House advisor, not to this one, not to any White House.
Not yet.
But there's a process. There's a very clear-cut process. It's available to the White House right now. If you find things that are odious in the federal payment system, programs that could not withstand any kind of serious political scrutiny from Republicans or Democrats, but since you're the majority party, just from Republicans, federal funding ends mid-March. That's when it expires, which means you need to have an appropriations bill to fund the government for the rest of this fiscal year. Why don't you put that on a list, send it to Congress and say, get rid of those things? You don't think the Republicans in Congress would vote to get rid of those things that can't withstand political scrutiny? I'm pretty confident they would. That's the actual process. That's what federal judges are saying. Congress appropriated this money. If you disagree with that, go back to Congress, have them rescind it, and the problem is solved. If you want to operate within the Constitution and the normal protocol of spending and decision-making. Whether this White House will avail themselves of that perfect and clarifying opportunity, I don't know. The president's comments suggest possibly otherwise.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Chanel Call. Tonight, an American school teacher who was detained in Russia for the last 4 years is back on American soil. Marc Fogel is arriving at the White House just right now. You can see he just got there moments ago in his motorcade after being released from Russian captivity. And greeting him outside the doors of the White House this hour, President Donald Trump. They will be heading inside in just a few moments to speak to reporters who are there. But just a bit of background here. The Pennsylvania man was arrested in 2021 with 17 grams of marijuana, which his family said was used for back pain. This is also someone who was sentenced to 14 years in prison in Russia. And we can also report special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, left Russia with Fogel earlier today on his private plane. President Trump also, we understand, pledged to get Fogel released when he met with Fogel's mother earlier this summer. The family released a statement today thanking Mr. Trump for his efforts in this. It is, though, unclear what, if anything, the U.S. gave Russia in exchange. Again, we're looking at live images just outside the White House this hour. You can clearly see President Donald Trump greeting Marc Fogel, who just arrived on American soil after being detained in Russia for the last 4 years. They're about to go inside, and we will hear from them inside the diplomatic room in the White House moments from now. Again, this was a long time coming for Marc Fogel and his family, who'd been advocating for this for many years now.
He's a very happy guy tonight, so it's just a real honor, an honor to have you at the White House.
I feel like the luckiest man on earth right now. And I want you to know that I am not a hero in this at all. And President Trump is a hero. These men that came from the diplomatic service are heroes. The senators and representatives that passed legislation in my honor to get me home are the heroes. I am in awe of what they all did. My family has been a force. I think my 95-year-old mother is probably the most dynamic 95-year-old on earth right now. And I am so indebted to so many people. I think I remember a Churchill quote that he said, when the RAF was fighting the Luftwaffe, and he said that never have so many owed so much to so few. And I put myself, fortunately and unfortunately, into that category, and I said, never has one owed so much to so many, that this superorganism of people that came to my support and the love that I was given sustained me for 3.5 years in a prison that had me in hospitals for more than 100 days. I was given more than 400 injections in that time. And knowing I had the support of my fellow Pennsylvanians, my family, my friends, it was so overwhelming that it brought me to my knees and it brought me to tears, but it was my energy, it was my being that kept me going that whole time. And I will forever be indebted to President Trump, to Steve over there. What a dynamic man this guy is.
That's true.
When I met him, the energy, the can-do attitude just exudes from his body. And when he smiled at me and introduced me, and I got the feel for what has happened, you know, it's not just me, it's everybody. And Secretary Rubio, who met my son a while back, I'm a middle-class school teacher who's now in a dream world.
We're going to show you the Lincoln bedroom in a little while. It's a very special place. Appropriate for tonight, I think. Very appropriate.
And thank you all. And I love our country. And I'm so happy to be back here. And I wish I could articulate it better.
You've done beautifully, and he's got a great mother. And when I saw the mother at a rally, she said, if you win, will you get my son out? And I promised. She's 95 years old. And I said, we'll get him out. And we got him out pretty quickly.
She told me that exact words.
I remember. She made quite an impression.
And you also did.
Yeah.
And I'm in awe of what you've done. And your team.
It's great to have you back.
Oh.
Gonna have a great life. Yes.
President, did you speak directly to President Putin about?
Well, I don't want to say that. I just want to say that I appreciate very much what they did in letting Mark go home. And I appreciate Steve Witkoff, the job he did, and Marco behind the scenes was unbelievable. And so many of these people were unbelievable. They represent him. They're from his area. And we just wanted to get him back home. I had to get him back home because I would have had big trouble with his mother. And we're going to take him for a little tour of the Lincoln bedroom, which nobody gets to see, and it's very special. Do you want to see it?
I would love to. And I also should make mention that President Putin was very generous and statesmanlike in granting me a pardon. I mean...
What were the terms of this deal, Mr. President?
Very fair, very fair, very reasonable. Not like deals you've seen over the years. They were very fair. And I think that's going to lead, and somebody else is being released tomorrow that you will know of. But we wanted to get this done, very important. And Steve wanted to actually fly over and get Mark and get him home properly, because it could be a pretty tough trip.
So is this the beginning of a deal, sir? Is this the start of?
I think there's goodwill in terms of the war. You know, 1.5 million soldiers, young people have been killed.
I've met many of them.
Yeah, and it's a terrible thing going on. So we want to get that done. I think this could be the very important element. You could be a big part of it, actually, because it could be a big, important part of getting the war over with Ukraine. And we appreciate President Putin's what he did. He was able to pull it off for you, right? He was able to pull it off. We think, and you're here, and you're here, so it was great. We'll tell you a little bit more about it tomorrow, but I think we've made great progress on the war also. Getting the war, I want to get the war ended. That war should not have been. It would have never happened if I was president. It would not have happened. And it did happen, and now you have all blown up cities and dead people. So many dead people. Should have never, ever happened. And you could be a big catalyst for just this evening. It's a very important evening for ending that war. And I think they all want to see it ended.
Does that mean you gave assurances about Ukraine?
How does it change your perspective on Putin and your attitude?
Well, I don't want to get into that. I only can say this. We got a man home whose mother and family wanted him desperately, whose state wanted him. He's become a big symbol. And it's an honor to have played a small role in that. And I want to tell you, these people, they all played a role. And we got him home, and he's healthy. It looks good, actually. To me, you look damn good, I'll tell you that.
I think when expectations are low,
Yeah.
maybe that helps a little bit.
When you go kaplunk, right?
Can you tell us about the conditions in the prison that you were in, sir?
I think I need a little bit of time to sort of digest all of that. There were times when it was extremely trying. There were times when I could manage it, but I think I need some more time to process it.
It wasn't easy, right? It wasn't easy.
Every second, every minute, every day had a challenge.
But you're in good shape. I mean, compare that to what we saw 2 days ago come home. They were very, very ill. Those people are very ill. They were treated really badly.
Mr. President, your predecessor left you almost $4 billion in unused aid for Ukraine. Are you going to use those money? Are you going to
we're going to
send
see, but my
weapons to
predecessor
Ukraine?
should have had this gentleman out a long time ago. We did it in 2.5 weeks. He had 4 years to do it. He should have had Mark out a lot earlier. It's a shame. It's a shame.
It was very...
Should have never had the war to start off with. Should have never had that war. Would have never happened if I was president. But he should have had him back 3.5 years ago. So it was too bad, but he didn't do it. But we did it. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Come on.
Mr. President, are reciprocal tariffs still coming tomorrow, or are you waiting until you need to vote?
We'll see what happens.
Have you spoken with President Xi?
All right, we're coming to you live from inside the White House this hour. Again, just moments ago, we saw Marc Fogel, a Pennsylvania man, arrive back on American soil. After returning home, he was detained in Russia for 4 years. We actually heard some candid moments just outside the White House before President Trump and Marc Fogel walked into the diplomatic room. You heard Marc Fogel talk about his release from captivity. He had a mask on. He said he couldn't see what was going on. And then, of course, we saw an image the White House had released just about an hour ago of Marc Fogel getting off the plane with this American flag draped across his neck. I want to bring in Weijia Jiang, who is live for us at the White House this hour. Weijia, such a huge moment for Marc Fogel's family and a notable victory for the Trump administration tonight. Marc Fogel calling President Trump a hero.
This really was a remarkable moment, Chanel. I mean, this is a president who truly values the drama and the impact of live television. So to watch this all unfold in this way, to have cameras capturing the very first time Fogel laid eyes on President Trump, for the President of the United States to greet him at the White House and welcome him home, and then immediately be whisked off to the diplomatic reception room to hear directly from the now freed American. It was a stunning moment. And to your point, Marc Fogel expressed his deep gratitude for the administration bringing him home. And this is a very personal story, Chanel, because his mother actually saw then candidate Trump at the now historic Butler rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where Marc Fogel is from. And of course, we know moments after the two met, the president, there was an attempted assassination on his life. But we know that Marc Fogel's mother, before that happened, pled with Trump to bring her son home. And he promised if he was elected to be president, he would do just that. So that is a promise kept from President Trump to the Fogel family, something his family has been speaking about publicly today. And so, yeah, this is a tremendous victory for President Trump. He is not divulging any terms of the deal, and neither are his aides. We don't know what Russia got in exchange for this. We know that President Trump said not much. He said it was a very good deal. We know that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, as well as the U.S. envoy for hostages, Adam Bowler, spoke earlier tonight and said there's not a one-for-one trade that happened tonight. They didn't, release somebody back into Russian custody, but said that President Trump would consider doing so for someone who is nonviolent and currently held in the U.S. or perhaps by a U.S. ally. We don't know any details of that. But yes, Chanel, this was a truly remarkable moment here at the White House. The president just said that he was going to show Marc Fogel the Lincoln bedroom. He is a teacher of history, a student of history, and Fogel seemed excited about that. But you have to imagine the state of mind he is in. In fact, one of the reporters asked about what conditions were like in prison, and he said he was not ready to talk about that because he had to process all of it. So here he is standing next to the President of the United States at the White House, being given a tour of the Lincoln bedroom. He said it was a dream, and I'm sure that's what it feels like for him tonight, Chanel.
And, you know, we'd heard from Marc Fogel's family the last couple of years. They'd been advocating for the Biden administration to do more to bring him home. Now we saw Trump saying just moments ago, our administration was able to do this, he says, in 2 weeks. Want to ask about how this happened and Steve Witkoff's role in all this, President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East.
Well, President Biden and President Trump have very different relationships with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Trump administration officials themselves say that Putin, as well as leaders from Venezuela and other countries that have given up American hostages, want to get in Trump's good graces. They believe that this is a step toward showing that there is goodwill there. And even though the two are not directly linked, President Trump himself said that this is a sign that good things are to come with regard to the end of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, which is one of his foreign policy goals, to help broker some kind of an agreement to end that war. And while we don't know exactly what led to this freeing of Marc Fogel, there were many people involved, including Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, who you mentioned. And even though this did not happen in the Middle East, this obviously in Russia, he did play a role. And in fact, he took his private plane on his own dime to pick up Fogel and bring him back to the United States.
And Trump also just saying tonight there will be another release tomorrow. Do we know any more about this?
Again, this is somebody who loves to build up the suspense. And so he and his administration officials have said, stay tuned. There's another American who is being freed tomorrow. We don't know who. We don't know where that person was being held. We don't know under what circumstances or conditions. But, you know, the U.S. Hostage envoy even said, you know, your viewers are going to need something for tomorrow. So teasing the fact that tomorrow they will have another major announcement when it comes to bringing another American back to U.S. soil.
And I just want to ask as well, because we didn't see a swap on the tarmac like we may have seen in previous deals like this tonight. And as you mentioned earlier, it's unclear what exactly, if anything, the U.S. gave up in exchange for getting Marc Fogel back here in the U.S. But what kind of impact could this have on America's role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the status of the war going forward?
Well, again, the administration has said it is a sign that Putin is acting in good faith, that he wants to come to the table, that perhaps they would be able to at least start the conversation about how that would be brokered. But I don't want to get ahead of our skis, Chanel, because the two, while they are indirectly related as it relates to the sort of perception that Putin may be wanting to present to President Trump, we should not read into what that means for the literal end of the war. There are many, many diplomatic steps that have to happen, but Trump has made no secret about the fact that he wants to be a major player in that negotiation.
This is a CBS News special report. Good afternoon. I'm Maurice Dubois. President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy are meeting at the White House, and moments ago, the two and Vice President J.D. Vance had an extraordinarily tense moment in the Oval Office.
What kind of diplomacy, J.D., you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, Everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a minute. No, you've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days, this is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's
I
very
understand.
important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't with me. That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make, because the attitudes have to change.
What if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do we do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden, because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia. The 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think?
What's this negotiation?
This is going to be great television, I will say that. All right. We'll see what we can do about putting it together. Thanks, sir.
I need the back of Extraordinary moments there in the White House. Moments ago, Donald Trump meeting with Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. Vice President J.D. Vance there as well. It devolved quickly into a shouting match. Donald Trump saying things like, you're in no position to dictate the terms of what we're doing here. You're gambling with World War III. You don't have the cards. You got to be more thankful. And then he put a punctuation point on it here that you are just going to make a deal or we are out. With that, I want to bring in Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. Unbelievable moments there, Margaret. What did you make of what you just saw?
Well, Maurice, that meeting went just about as poorly as it possibly could for Ukraine, which relies so heavily on U.S.-made weaponry, even if European allies are helping to supply it. It is U.S.-made weapons that the Ukrainians are relying on. The president repeatedly pointing back to that. A few things there that seem to have ignited this exchange in front of the camera. You know, it was J.D. Vance who jumped into the conversation, arguing that there is a path to peace through diplomacy. The thing that seemed to be the irritant was when President Zelenskyy pointed out that there had been repeated diplomatic deals with Vladimir Putin of Russia to stop the Ukraine invasion, but that was back after the 2014 partial invasion. And President Zelenskyy made that point, saying we have had ceasefires and Russia has violated them and just used it to rebuild and then go through with this full-scale invasion. He pointed out that that happened not just on President Obama's watch, but then on President Trump's. It was the so-called Minsk agreement that fell apart in 2019. Donald Trump was president of the United States at that point. So while you hear President Trump repeatedly say, Vladimir Putin hasn't broken deals on my watch, Zelenskyy was pointing out, actually, this did happen on your watch. President Trump also pushing at him, saying it was my first administration that provided Ukraine weapons, defensive weapons. That is an accurate statement. The Obama administration did not provide defensive weaponry to Ukraine after that 2014 invasion, afraid it would somehow provoke Vladimir Putin. It was Javelin missiles in 2017 that the United States did provide under Donald Trump to Ukraine. So there was this sort of rewriting of history going back and forth here. And it was J.D. Vance, the vice president, who jumped in, sort of defending Donald Trump and also saying to President Zelenskyy, you haven't been thankful enough. One other fact here that I want to go back to for the record, you heard President Trump say we gave $350 billion to Ukraine. According to the CBS confirmed unit totals of U.S. aid, that's not an accurate number. The U.S. government's Ukraine Oversight Group reported Congress has appropriated $183 billion for the broader Ukraine response. The bottom line here, though, is America is the chief weapons supplier, helping Ukraine defend its democracy against Russia. And any further congressional support is going to be hard to get through and hard to get President Trump to sign off on unless he decides that Vladimir Putin isn't abiding by this as yet unagreed upon ceasefire and peace deal. President Trump said he's the one who can change the game. But it was just really explosive here. And it was a punctuation point on a week where a number of European leaders, Maurice, have come to the White House to try to persuade President Trump that Europe isn't freeloading, that Europe is doing a lot, and that Ukraine is the victim here of Russian aggression, and that should be clearly stated. Remember, Maurice, before I hand it back to you, that it was a rewriting of the facts that we saw this week, with the President of the United States no longer wanting to say that Russia was the aggressor in this conflict. And it was Russia that invaded Ukraine in 2022.
As the whole world would seem to know, Margaret, as we've been pointing out all week. Let's think about this here for a second, Margaret. The president of Ukraine came here to try to make a deal, to try to deal with President Trump on negotiating to give the United States some access to the returns, the funding from the country's special minerals that they have there. Instead, they started looking backwards. There was no looking forwards to what the deal or what the peace is going to look like in terms of security for Ukraine, in terms of dealing with Russia. This all went backwards. I've never seen anything go backwards like that and sideways as well at the same time. Margaret, have you?
No, I haven't. And Maurice, you put your finger on something very, very important there, which is that there was a lot of baggage that came into that room with President Zelenskyy when he walked in and sat down across from President Trump. And President Trump went there. He went back and started, actually, it was towards a reporter, the President of the United States started yelling, what if a bomb fell on your head, saying like basically anything can happen. But then he started talking about Russian election meddling. If you remember, in 2016, with the first election of Donald Trump to the presidency, there were extensive investigations run by Congress, run by the FBI, into the degree to which Russian disinformation efforts and meddling in the electoral process may have influenced the outcome. President Trump, whenever Russia comes up as a topic, often refers to it. He did it yesterday in the Oval Office yesterday, also sitting next to the UK Prime Minister, said when it comes to Vladimir Putin, he went through what he calls the Russian election hoax with me. I don't know what he's meaning by that, but he brought up the 2016 election meddling in 2025. And with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, you remember he also has a unique place in the first Trump administration's history because it was that phone call that then became public discussing U.S. aid to Ukraine that was and whether it was withheld for political purposes, that was the focus of the first impeachment of Donald Trump. The president of the United States just brought up Hunter Biden's bathroom, and I think that was a reference back to that impeachment episode. So, Maurice, there was a lot of baggage that was brought into this conversation, which was supposed to be about a minerals agreement and investment between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Kind of lost at the moment. Okay, Margaret Brennan, thank you so much for the insight. Let's head over to Nancy Cordes, Chief White House Correspondent. Nancy, that was really something to witness. Where do we go from here?
That is a great question, Maurice, because the leaders are meeting behind closed doors right now. And after that, they're supposed to hold a news conference with the president standing side by side, two podiums with President Zelenskyy. And we're asking whether that news conference is still going to go forward after the spectacle that we just witnessed in the Oval Office. What I can tell you is that at this hour, TV news crews are still setting up for that news conference as if it's happening. And the White House press secretary a few minutes ago posted the video of that tense exchange and said, quote, President Trump and Vice President Vance are standing up for the American people. So the Trump White House is owning this moment. They are trumpeting this moment. They are making sure that it gets out there. And the question is where we go from here, because ostensibly Zelenskyy had come here to Washington to sign a minerals deal. And obviously what happened in the Oval Office is that as they talked to reporters for about 45 minutes before you even got to that very combative exchange at the very end, the tension was ratcheting up the entire time because President Trump wanted to talk about this big, beautiful minerals deal and how the U.S. was going to be an investor and what the U.S. was going to get out of it, while Zelenskyy, unsurprisingly, wanted to focus much more on security for his country and a peace deal and trying to make the case in front of the cameras to President Trump and obviously the vice president that Vladimir Putin was someone who couldn't be trusted and that, in his words, Putin was a terrorist who doesn't abide by the rules of war or the rules of peace. And that appears to be what really rankled President Trump. And eventually, after taking questions and making their various positions known for 45 minutes, led to this outburst.
Nancy, I know you've been in the Oval many times. You've covered the White House for a good long time. Has anything like that ever materialized before your eyes?
Well, certainly not in the Biden years, Maurice. And part of that is because typically when President Biden and most presidents welcome a foreign leader into the Oval Office, a small group of reporters is allowed in, just like I was yesterday when Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK was visiting. We're allowed in. The two men are sitting in chairs, or the two leaders are sitting in chairs, just like you see there. They both make a little statement. Maybe the president takes one or two questions and then we're ushered out. You know, we're shouting, we're trying to get more questions answered, but typically that's called a spray. It doesn't last very long, and then they actually get down to business behind closed doors. What President Trump clearly likes to do is hold court, take lots of questions. The foreign leader takes lots of questions, and that poses an interesting challenge and dilemma for the foreign leader who is at his side, to make a case in public that he thinks will get him farther than if he does it in private. And in this case, that calculation by Zelenskyy appears to have backfired because President Trump basically ended up scolding him the way someone might scold a teenager, telling him, you're ungrateful and you need to say thank you. And the situation just evolved from there.
Yeah, supposed to be a photo op, Nancy, but you're gambling with World War III came out of that eventually from President Trump. Nancy Cordes at the White House, thank you. Let's go to our Imtiaz Tayeb in Kyiv in Ukraine. I don't know, Imtiaz, if you've had a chance to gauge any kind of reaction at this point. I know it's early, but what'd you make of what you saw?
It is quite a scene at the White House. Here in Kyiv, people, of course, are digesting what they've just seen. We've been looking online trying to see what the sort of mood here is in Ukraine. Some of the quotes coming out are, and again, this is online, some saying, bring back nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine denuclearized itself some time ago. But really what we're seeing is a lot of support for Zelenskyy. In fact, we were also speaking a little bit earlier to a senior Ukrainian official who said that the Ukrainian president, was, in his words, quote, ambushed by President Trump and the vice president as well. Take from that what you will. But I think many Ukrainians who will no doubt be seeing this later tonight, or indeed when they wake up in the morning, will be shocked by the scenes that they saw in the White House. Again, this was an extraordinary scene, because you have to remember, just 24 hours ago, we heard from President Trump where he walked back calling or accusing Volodymyr Zelenskyy of being a dictator. That, of course, is not true. It's a false statement. And so there was some hope that Mr. Zelenskyy would go to the White House, that this deal would be signed, and these two leaders could potentially turn the page. And it doesn't really look like that's happened. You only have to look at that image that we've seen. There's a photo going around of the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., and you can see her very clearly with her head in her hands. And I think that really sums up how a lot of people here in Ukraine are feeling about what they've just saw at the White House.
Okay, Imtiaz Tayeb, there is that image right there, head in hands. Cannot believe what she just saw, or what anybody just saw for that matter. We're going to continue to cover this.
President Trump says America is back. He doubled down on his vision and agenda for the nation in last night's address before Congress. During the mostly partisan speech, he boasted about his accomplishments in his first weeks in office.
My fellow Americans, get ready for an incredible future because the golden age of America has only just begun. It will be like nothing that has ever been seen before. Thank you. God bless you.
The president touted his administration's sweeping changes to immigration, national security, and the economy as part of his plan for the, quote, renewal of the American dream.
Well, you could see deep party divisions on display in the chamber last night. Some Democrats holding signs in silent protest, others even walking out. Republicans, they said they liked what they heard as President Trump touted what he called swift and unrelenting action during his first 6 weeks of his second term and said his administration is just getting started.
President Donald Trump got a rousing reception from Republicans.
America is back.
From the Democrats, there was dissent. Texas Congressman Al Green was escorted away just minutes into the president's speech.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum.
During his speech, the president asked Congress for more funding of border security.
Americans expect Congress to send me this funding without delay.
He doubled down on cuts to the federal government.
I imposed an immediate freeze on all federal hiring, a freeze on all new federal regulations, and a freeze on all foreign aid.
Following Friday's clash, President Trump played up a new letter from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer.
The president also announced that one of the suspected planners behind the 2021 bombing attack that killed 13 U.S. service members outside Kabul airport in Afghanistan has been arrested.
The economy was the main topic of the night. President Trump defended putting new tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, and he pledged to put reciprocal tariffs on other countries next month.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that.
Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin delivered the Democratic response.
America wants change, but there's a responsible way to make change and a reckless way.
A CBS News poll showed that a heavily Republican audience approved of the president's speech.
Now, while we heard the president defending his tariff policy during the speech, notably after the address, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick spoke to reporters here on Capitol Hill and said that the administration might modify the tariffs against Canada and Mexico. He didn't give details, but said that more information could be coming as soon as today, Errol.
So there was some news in the speech on Ukraine, on the arrest of this terrorist, also a lot of theatrics and partisanship. What stood out to you?
Well, these speeches often are partisan. They're a call to action, but there wasn't a lot of specificity in this speech. It did feel like a campaign rally. What stood out to me was the anger in the room, the thin attendance by Democrats, and the lack of explanation for any of these policy promises.
Let's talk about the tariffs. You know, he said he was talking about economists are saying they're going to drive the prices higher. He mentioned the reciprocal tariffs that are going to go into effect. How does he justify it to Americans who are very skeptical and very worried, quite frankly, about these tariffs?
Right. And well, the president argues, and the Treasury Secretary said this to me just Sunday, he doesn't own this economy for a good 6 to 12 months. So he's saying give him time. Consumers, of course, want to go to the grocery store now and see lower prices. So that's his explanation there. On the tariffs, there is no estimate that the administration will share publicly about the cost. Peterson Institute says it'll be $1,200 more per household. Treasury Secretary said it's unknowable at this point because we don't know how the trade war will go. But what we have seen just in the past 24 hours is showing those lawmakers, those traders on Wall Street, those diplomats, they were wrong when they thought the tariff threat was just about leverage. The president actually does believe that this is the heart of his economic policy, and we're all going to sort of watch this play out in real time.
And he reiterated his desire to end the war in Ukraine. He also revealed that he received a letter from President Zelenskyy. Where does all of that stand after that infamous Oval Office blow-up? We're talking about the negotiations between the U.S., Russia, and, of course, Ukraine.
Well, to be clear, there are no negotiations between Russia and Ukraine at this point. There's no diplomacy. The only talks that are happening between the U.S. and Ukraine are about this economic partnership, as the U.S. is calling it, or minerals agreement that Ukrainians have said they're more than willing to sign. We don't yet have a promise from the president that he is willing to do that, but he did express interest last night. From the podium, but he has also frozen $4 billion of military equipment that was supposed to go to Ukraine. So does this public statement from Zelenskyy unfreeze that? We have not heard that to date. The only talks that are happening between the U.S. and Russia right now are about reopening diplomatic properties in each other's countries. So the United States is pulling Vladimir Putin out of isolation. So these two things are happening in parallel, but neither side's talking to each other right now.
Speaking of pulling out, what do we know about this top terrorist apparently responsible for the Kabul airport attack?
His name is Mohammed Sharifullah. He was captured as part of a CIA operation with the Pakistanis. He was interviewed, according to the affidavit, by the FBI March 2nd, and in that said he was a member of ISIS-K going back to 2016, that he had conducted surveillance and training related to that murderous attack that killed 13 service people and at least 160 civilians during the messy evacuation from Afghanistan. Interestingly, also helped to train people for that terrorist attack that took place in Moscow years later. So we'll see. He'll face justice in the Eastern District of Virginia.
CBS News has learned more about the Trump administration's expected plan to escalate its immigration crackdown. Multiple U.S. officials familiar with the plan say the president will invoke a 227-year-old wartime law to authorize the deportation of some migrants as soon as Friday. This would include deportations to the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. It's known as the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and it gives presidents power to order the rapid detention and deportation of non-citizens older than 14 and who come from countries staging a, quote, invasion or predatory incursion of the U.S. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now with his reporting on this. So what is behind the decision to invoke this?
Just to put it in perspective, Lindsay, about how extraordinary this move would be, this law was signed and passed by Congress just 22 years after the Declaration of Independence in 1798, and it allows presidents to gain this extraordinary power to order the arrest, detention, and removal of non-citizens ages 14 and older from countries that are deemed to be invading the U.S. or orchestrating a predatory incursion into the country. And we are told that the president is preparing to invoke this wartime law as soon as tomorrow to authorize the detention and deportation of certain migrants who are here illegally, including suspected members of the Tren de Aragua Venezuelan prison gang, which, as you know, has been a focal point of the president's sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration. And essentially, this law would allow officials to process people subject to it without any of the due process protections outlined in U.S. immigration law, including the right to seek asylum. People would be able to be summarily detained and deported because they would be treated not as migrants facing deportation, but as enemy aliens. And so this is almost certainly going to face legal challenges in federal court.
On this St. Patrick's Day, as millions of Americans celebrate their Irish heritage, recent events remind us that the Irish were among the first immigrants to be targeted in deportation crackdowns.
In the mid-1800s, New York and Massachusetts enforced policies to have Irish immigrants rounded up and deported.
The American Civil Liberties Union didn't exist then, but if it had, it may have taken the legal position it is taking now, suing the Trump administration to stop what it considers to be the illegal deportation over the weekend of more than 200 migrants to El Salvador.
The big difference now, the administration says many of those flown to Central America are considered by the government to be terrorists.
The administration cited a rarely used 18th century law to justify the deportations. Senior White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe is following this story. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, John. The White House is strongly defending its decision to fly alleged gang members out of the country by using presidential war powers dating back to Thomas Jefferson. The U.S. isn't at war with anyone right now, but the president is picking a legal fight. This deportation flight landed early Sunday in El Salvador. The cameras were ready. Footage, slickly produced by the Salvadoran government, shows they were whisked away to one of the most notorious prisons in the world. CBS News visited last month, finding 80 to 100 men crammed into a cell. Officially, it can hold up to 40,000 prisoners, but at the time was only half full. The Trump administration has vowed to help fill it, paying El Salvador $6 million to take 3 plane loads on Sunday.
These were bad people.
Most were removed under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, last invoked by Franklin D. Roosevelt to detain Japanese immigrants in internment camps during World War II. Today, the White House stood by the president's moves. And so you're saying definitively that the administration can prove everyone that was put on those flights to El Salvador was either a member of Tren de Aragua, MS-13, or some other entity?
We've already provided the breakdown in the effort of transparency about the 261 illegal aliens who were deported.
The White House says most were members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang, others from the transnational MS-13 gang, including 2 ringleaders. What criteria, though, other than, say, tattoos or maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, are they using to determine that someone is actually a member of one of these organizations?
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground in the interior of our country who are finally being allowed to do their jobs.
The president's use of the law sparked a weekend legal fight where minutes mattered. After the White House revealed it had invoked the act on Saturday, the planes took off. Shortly after, a judge ordered the planes to turn around, but they never did, and a third flight would depart a few minutes later. David Beard tracks immigration policy for the libertarian Cato Institute. Why should any American care about these flights that went and the way those people were sent away?
We have no idea whether these people were in the country legally or illegally, whether they were in a gang or not.
The bigger part of this, perhaps, is that it's part of the ongoing fight over what exactly an American president can do. Is that fair?
Once we get to the point in the country where the president gets to say, I can arrest anyone, I don't have to prove anything, I don't have to go to courts, I don't have to follow the laws as they're written, then that's anarchy.
So, Ed, how much does the White House want this to be a public fight?
Oh, President Trump's been talking about using this law ever since he launched his second White House campaign, so it's no surprise to his supporters. But this is exactly the political and legal fight they want. First of all, polling continues to show a majority of Americans support what he's doing on immigration. They believe this sustains that. And legally, they believe ultimately a conservative-leaning Supreme Court is going to rule in their favor.
And though, what does the judge say at this point about this, Ed?
So there was a hearing today. There's going to be another one on Friday. He's asking the administration for more details about who exactly was on those 3 flights, why were they sent without following his orders, and how many more people might be still in the United States that could conceivably be sent to El Salvador, or at least deported, by using the Alien Enemies Act. He admonished them for ignoring his rulings on Saturday night. The ACLU, which is suing in this case, says they're going to ask the judge to order flights to bring back those immigrants, believing that El Salvador is basically working as a private prison on behalf of the United States.
Well, the Trump administration has disclosed more details surrounding Saturday's deportation flights as it defends its actions in court. The administration sent hundreds of alleged gang members to El Salvador despite a judge's order demanding they turn the planes around. Some of the migrants were deported under the Alien Enemies Act, a centuries-old law designed to be used in times of war or an invasion. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez joins us now. So, Camila, what did the DOJ tell the court Tuesday about these flights, and what else does the judge want to know?
Well, the Justice Department confirmed to this judge in federal district court in Washington, D.C., that it indeed sent 3 deportation flights to El Salvador over the weekend. 2 of them took off before the judge actually said that these removals under the Alien Enemies Act had to stop because of that court restraining order, and one of those flights took off after that directive was issued. But they said the third flight that took off at the latest hour only carried migrants who were not processed under the Alien Enemies Act, but instead were deported on the regular immigration proceedings. And those deportations right now are not blocked by this judge in federal district court. However, the judge is now asking more questions about the 2 flights that did leave before he issued that order and that landed after he issued the written and oral directives, because he wants to know when they actually landed in El Salvador. We know, according to our own timeline here at CBS News, that we have confirmed that all the planes landed well after he issued his directives, and so they are in violation at least of his oral directive, which included an instruction to return the planes to the U.S. even if they were in the middle of the skies. The Justice Department, of course, as you know, is arguing that the court has no jurisdiction to order the return of planes that were over international waters, not over U.S. land. This judge is not buying that.
Well, and the judge wants these answers by noon
Yes.
tomorrow. So an ICE official also submitted a sworn declaration about the vetting of these migrants.
Yes.
What can you tell us?
Well, now an ICE official is saying that everyone who was deported to Venezuela to El Salvador from Venezuela under the Alien Enemies Act was carefully looked at, and their cases were carefully reviewed to verify and confirm that they are indeed members of the transnational Tren de Aragua criminal gang. And that is, of course, the gang that President Trump is arguing is orchestrating and staging an invasion or an incursion into the U.S., triggering this wartime authority. The officials said that they are relying on international and U.S. criminal databases, social media, and other technologies and skills to determine that these immigrants are allegedly part of Tren de Aragua. But importantly, the official confirmed that many of these detainees and deportees don't have any criminal records in the U.S., and some do, including for murder and assault and other dangerous offenses and serious offenses. But the official conceded that not everyone is a criminal, but instead that some of them are just migrants who are in the country illegally, and that they were processed under this law because they have some link to Tren de Aragua. Of course, advocates would tell us, Lindsay, that this is a slippery slope and that their clients in many cases are being accused of TDA membership merely because of speculation and tattoos.
A Maryland father with protected legal status was deported to El Salvador by mistake. The Trump administration acknowledged he was deported because of an administrative error, but it argued it couldn't bring him back because he is now in El Salvador in custody. This marks the administration's first error admission related to its recent deportation flights to El Salvador. Meanwhile, a federal judge in California agreed to delay the government's move to end the temporary protected status program for Venezuelans, set to take effect just next week. The program shields roughly 350,000 Venezuelan migrants from deportation. Let's bring in our immigration and politics reporter, Camilo Montoya Galvez. Camilo, good to see you today. Let's talk about that mistaken deportation first off. What do we know about that man, and what was the government's reasoning for deporting him in the first place?
Hi, Muga. Good morning. We know that Kilmar Abrego Garcia came to the U.S. in 2011 from El Salvador when he was 16. And in 2019, an immigration judge, Mugo, actually granted this man legal protection from deportation. He was granted something called withholding of removal, which is given to foreigners, immigrants here in the U.S. who are able to prove in immigration court that they could be persecuted if they are deported to their home country. And he was able to convince that judge that he could face persecution by gangs in El Salvador if he was deported. And over the past years, according to his attorneys, this man has been regularly and routinely checking in with immigration and customs enforcement. He has a wife in Maryland who's a U.S. citizen, and also a U.S. citizen child who is disabled, also in Maryland. But according to his attorneys, he was detained suddenly by ICE in March, and then ultimately, as we know, deported on March 15 to El Salvador, and also, importantly, imprisoned at that maximum security prison known as Secot, where the Trump administration has also sent Venezuelan deportees as part of that high-profile operation that is now at the center of a high-stakes legal battle. The lawyers for this man are now requesting that a federal court in Maryland order the Trump administration to order his return, and also to order the U.S. to stop paying Salvadorian officials to detain their clients. But the Trump administration is arguing that this request should be denied on several grounds. The first ground is that they believe it is not in the public interest to return this man to the U.S., even though they concede they mistakenly deported him despite that legal protection from deportation, because the government is now saying that he is an alleged member of a gang and is a danger to U.S. communities. The second ground is that the administration is saying, Mugo, that federal courts lack complete jurisdiction in this matter because this man is no longer in American custody. He's in the custody of the Salvadorian government, and federal courts, according to the Justice Department, have no authority to order foreign countries to do something.
We begin tonight with a question. How on earth did this happen?
This is an extraordinary, potentially dangerous, and without a doubt embarrassing breach of national security.
A journalist was inadvertently included on a text message chain in which the president's national security team was planning an attack on Yemen's Houthi rebels.
Then, on the day of the attack, with the journalist still included in the text message chain, the Secretary of Defense spelled out exactly how it would play out 2 hours before it did.
This all happened on an encrypted text messaging service called Signal, which is not approved for sharing classified information.
Ed O'Keefe is at the White House with more about the security breach and the president's reaction tonight. Ed?
Good evening. The senior officials on the group text debated whether or not the U.S. should strike Houthi targets and swap details of the airstrikes. The details so sensitive, the reporter who accidentally received it all opted not to publish them out of concern for national security. The U.S. bombed Houthi rebel positions in Yemen on March 15th in response to the group's continued attacks on commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea and missile strikes against Israel. The classified details of the U.S. attack plans were first shared 2 days earlier with Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. He'd been added, accidentally, to a group chat of senior administration officials on Signal, invited by National Security Advisor Michael Waltz.
I've never heard of anything quite like this.
In all, 18 people were in the chat, including Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard.
People have devices that are extraordinarily convenient, and government officials are just like you and me. They like convenience. They're just like you and me. They sometimes send text to people they didn't mean to send text to. The consequences here are a lot higher for that sort of thing than in regular civilian life.
Goldberg watched on his phone as the group debated striking the Houthis. And then, on the morning of the attacks, Hegseth shared operational details about the forthcoming strike, including the timing, the targets, and the types of weapons used. Once the strikes concluded, the group exchanged emojis in celebration, flames, fist bumps, and American flags. Sharing top-secret details over Signal likely violated the Espionage Act, according to CBS News national security consultant Sam Vinograd.
Operational plans related to the Houthis and strikes in Yemen more than likely are classified or at least operationally sensitive. So it'll be important to see whether the Department of Justice opens up an investigation into a potential leak of classified information.
Goldberg's article first published on Monday while the president was holding a cabinet meeting with most of the people on the text group.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine.
And Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, what's the White House saying behind the scenes?
The press secretary says tonight, John, that the president has the utmost confidence in his national security team, including National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, whose office admits Jeffrey Goldberg shouldn't have been on the text chain.
Ed, you've covered the White House for several years now. Have you ever seen a lapse like this? I mean, how big a deal are we talking about here?
Oh, this is a big deal, Maurice, because this is the kind of internal conversation that normally happens in the basement behind thick doors in the Situation Room, far away from reporters ever go. And the reason they happen in a room like that is so that they can be protected from foreign interference or spies. And that's what has Democrats, Republicans, and intelligence officials in this town and across the country concerned, that if they're discussing this kind of information in an unclassified setting, what else might they be discussing?
Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thank you, Ed.
National security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is at the Pentagon. So, Charlie, tell us more about Signal here. This is the text messaging app the national security team was using.
Yeah, so Signal is a messaging app similar to WhatsApp, but officials tell me the rules are black and white. It is strictly forbidden to share classified information like this on an unclassified system like Signal. There are specific secure systems and specific devices for sharing classified information.
Charlie, they talked about a target package. What is a target package?
Yeah, John, it's essentially what to hit in what order. Sending out war plans, including the precise timings of airstrikes and the targets they're hitting, puts aircraft and pilots in danger. The United States doesn't want adversaries to know when it's coming and exact locations of the target list. The Houthis do have a missile force and have shot down American drones.
The chat was all the talk today.
The security breach that allowed a journalist to join a chat in which the Trump National Security Team was planning an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. The president downplayed it, insisting there was nothing classified in the chat, which used the texting app known as Signal.
On Capitol Hill, members of Congress did what they usually do, choosing sides and adjectives. Republicans call the breach a mistake.
But Democrat Mark Warner chose sloppy, careless, incompetent, and topped it all off with fiasco.
Republican John Kennedy said most Americans don't care about the breach, but fellow Republican Lindsey Graham acknowledged we dodged a bullet.
And CBS News has learned the administration was warned recently not to use the Signal app because it is not secure. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House. Ed?
Good evening, guys. That's right. A little more than 2 weeks before that journalist was accidentally added to the group text, CBS News has learned the National Security Agency issued this memo warning against using Signal. Because it's so popular, the NSA warned, Signal could be a, quote, high-value target to intercept sensitive information. President Trump insisted today the texting troubles caused by his top officials weren't a big deal.
There was no classified information, as I understand it.
But Atlantic Magazine editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, who was added accidentally to the Signal group chat, says top officials were discussing sensitive, secretive war plans to bomb Houthi rebels in Yemen.
I found it completely improbable that the top national security leadership of the United States would be discussing on a commercial messaging app the possible imminent attack on another country, and that they would mistakenly, I assume mistakenly, invite the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic Magazine into their discussion.
Goldberg reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared highly sensitive operational details about the March 15 strikes, including targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and when they'd be fired. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who originally invited Goldberg to the chat, was one of many Trump allies today who sought to discredit him.
This journalist, Mr. President, wants the world talking about more hoaxes and this kind of nonsense rather than the freedom that you're enabling.
Democrats on Capitol Hill were infuriated the administration wasn't taking any responsibility for the mistake, grilling National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, both of whom were part of the group chat.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error.
Gabbard acknowledged she was traveling abroad during part of the chat, as was the president's envoy to the Middle East and Russia, Steve Witkoff, who was in Moscow at the time. Chris O'Leary worked in counterterrorism at the FBI.
This is signaling to the entire world that our most senior leaders have poor operational security, and there's an opportunity here to maybe pursue them.
Now, Ed, what else have we learned about how the White House uses these types of apps available to the public?
Well, first off, we know the president still uses a personal cell phone. Unclear if he discusses or receives any sensitive information or if there's any protection on that phone. As for Signal, we know administration officials today were reassessing how often to use it, but it is quite popular with Trump administration officials, as it was during the Biden era, because they discuss internally and externally all sorts of issues on it. The Trump team sees it as a convenient tool that is secure because there's been no evidence of it ever being hacked.
Ed, Maurice and I were talking earlier about the fact the White House says there's no classified information here, and we both said so they'd be okay with releasing it and letting Goldberg release it. Are they okay with it?
Well, not quite. Look, they're in cleanup mode. They acknowledge this is a mistake, but they are in no way encouraging Goldberg to release the rest of the information he has, believing private conversations should have and should remain private.
One more thing here, Ed, just 15 seconds or so. What would happen if a low-level staffer did this kind of thing? Would they still have a job?
If it was someone in the military, they'd likely be court-martialed and kicked out. Intelligence, diplomatic, and military officials, no. You don't share classified or sensitive information on commercially available apps because it's against the law.
Effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. Starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. We used to think about it a lot. We didn't think about it for many decades, and you see what's happened. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, very kind. You're not so kind when you got ripped off with your salaries. My auto worker friends and my Teamster friends and all of the unions that typically voted Democrat, they're not voting Democrat anymore because worker, whether union or non-worker, they're for the Republicans now. That's what happened. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. If you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart? And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. So we're going to have a minimum of cheating, and we're going to be very severe on the people that at the gate that watch the tariffs and watch the product coming in, because there's been a lot of bad things happening at the gate because the money is so enormous that you're talking about. There's never been probably anything like it in terms of the enormity, and there are a lot of bad things happen at the people that do the check-in, and they're looking at 10-year jail sentences if they do play. We're going to treat them so good, but if they cheat, the repercussions are going to be extremely strong.
And so, starting very soon, he is getting ready to impose tariffs on foreign cars and parts, 25% from anywhere. And then he's also announcing 10% at least tariffs on all countries. And then what he calls the worst offenders, the bigger tariffs, they're going to be 34% for China, India 26%, Japan 24%, the EU 20%, Taiwan 32%. He promised this would be big. It has gotten a lot of people's attention. Let's go to Weijia Jiang at the White House. He called this a national emergency, Weijia. Can you put this into some kind of context for us?
Yeah, Maurice, so this was the president's very first event during his second term in the Rose Garden, which speaks to just how important this is to him. He got all the pomp and circumstance. He was surrounded by members of his cabinet. And of course, he brought in workers from the steel and automobile industry to make his case, Maurice, that this is going to be what he calls the golden age of America, because his theory is that if you tack on these tariffs to imports into America, well, companies here don't want to pay that. And so they are going to boost manufacturing. They're going to buy American and not want to pay the rates that you are seeing on your screen, Maurice. Now, what we did not know is exactly what countries would be impacted and the rate. And we know now that the administration used a formula to calculate what they are calling the total sum of all unfair trade practices. Now, that includes currency manipulation, tariff barriers, and of course, what these countries charge on American exports. So you can see here for China as the top example, 67%. Half of that is 34%, because President Trump says he wants to be, quote, kind to the world. So he is not going to impose the full 100% tit for tat, but 50% of that sum. And in addition to that, Maurice, it's important to note that what we were not expecting today was a 10% tariff on all countries. So whether, they are a part of this worst offenders group, as the administration calls, or not, there will be a 10% tariff. And of course, it's notable, I think, that he's making this announcement after the closing bell. We have been reporting for so many weeks, Maurice, about how the uncertainty of this has already rattled the stock market and certainly consumer confidence. So as we take all of this in, it'll be critical to watch the response, not only here, but globally.
Okay, Weijia Jiang at the White House, you are absolutely right. It is a big bet. And joining me now is Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, we're getting reaction in after-hours trading. It's key to note that he did this after the markets closed at 4 o'clock. So what's the reaction you're seeing, and what are people going to have to deal with going forward?
Yeah, Weijia was very, very right to note that. So I was just looking at a couple of the companies that really rely on that global supply chain. So they are relying on countries like China and Taiwan. NVIDIA, right? Big AI stock.
Huge.
That's one of them. They get all their chips from Taiwan. So when you've got a 32% tariff being charged there, that is why the stock is down. Apple also, where do we get our iPhones from? China. Big tariff on that. And so that's why you're seeing the after hours trading go down. 3 takeaways that I want to give you. One is how investors are going to react going forward. Because, maybe this is just a little blip we're seeing in after hours trading. Maybe. But uncertainty has been the word of this quarter along with tariffs. And so we haven't heard from the president in his speech today that this is the end. He has sort of teased in the past, maybe pharmaceuticals, lumber. I think you might see more investor skittishness if there's
uncertainty, right?
Yes, exactly. Also, you have companies that are probably going to have to invest billions of dollars in manufacturing here in the U.S. For investors, that's not a short-term good thing for the bottom line. There's undeniable benefits long-term, a global supply chain being here, more American jobs, but investors are worried about the short-term. You also mentioned consumers.
The everyday person looking at this, oh my gosh.
Exactly. What's
These are
going
numbers
on
being
Main
thrown
Street?
around all over the place.
Right.
What does it mean to everyday people?
Well, one, it's going to likely scare people, right? And we've already seen that in some of the consumer sentiment data that we've talked about, that people have cited anxiety about what tariffs could do to prices. You hear numbers like this, very curious to see reaction from consumers in those next surveys, how they're feeling about it. The real impact, though, is going to be in prices. If companies decide to pass that massive import tax on, that they are paying, by the way, not the countries on, prices are going to go higher. And the final thing that I want to note is what happens to the economy, because let's pull this all together. And weirdly enough, I'm going to ask for a chart that our lovely control team just pulled up, because this shows how Wall Street sees the pains that Main Street could have. There are a couple of dates on here. We never saw the biggest drops on days where there were tariff announcements. We saw them on the days where there were consumer confidence and that it was deteriorating or inflation was negative. And so when you put this all together, you could have a growth problem, and that's where investors and consumers are going to be watching.
One more quick point. He talks about how this is going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Does that happen overnight?
It does not. It does not. It takes years. It takes billions of dollars.
This is a CBS News special report. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maurice Dubois. President Trump making big news this afternoon. He's just announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for many countries around the world. In a Truth Social post here, it's a lengthy one. I'm going to read it to you. The president said, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, he said, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, that's the U.S. Trade Representative, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade, trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs, and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. I have authorized, the president says here, a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And that is the entirety of the president's Truth Social post there. All this has the stock market surging right now, up 5 and 3 0.3% there, up some 2,000 points at this moment. It's been going back and forth. Let's bring in our Money Watch correspondent, Kelly O'Grady. First reaction here, Kelly, what in the wide world is going on here?
You're seeing a lot of relief in the markets right now. I mean, we are coming off a sell-off this past week and a half at this point. And I'm just going to quote a couple of numbers for you. The NASDAQ is inching up about 8% right now. S&P 500, 6%. Both the S&P and NASDAQ were either flirting with or in bear market territory prior to this announcement. That basically means when that index has lost 20% or more from their recent highs. And it basically just means investors are cautious, they're worried, they're nervous. And you see the fact that we're coming back from this really in the tech stocks and the chip sector. And why? Because if you're going to have a tariff that was once over 30% on countries that we rely on for chips that power the AI industry, and by the way, your 401k too. Right, Taiwan, and that's going to go down to 10%. That's why investors are reacting so positively right now.
But this is a 90-day pause. That gives them some level of certainty, quote unquote, for the moment. But this is not a long-term thing. So sugar high or not, that remains to be seen. Talk about the psychology here that leads to this kind of euphoric feeling.
And that's exactly right. In fact, I'm texting with investors right now saying, how are you feeling? Is this temporary? Sugar high, I think, is a good way to describe this because we have seen the president with Canada, with Mexico, with other countries do this pause before, where we're going to do it, now we're not going to do it, and at some point in the future, that levy does get put on, those tariffs do get put on. So the investors that I'm talking to are sort of getting back in the sectors where they think that this is going to be a positive, but they are still very cautious because we have seen this change so rapidly, which gets to that uncertainty point, Maurice.
Right. Are you surprised? Or should we be surprised? Or did people see this coming all along? I'm wondering.
Well, I'm never surprised now when we talk about tariffs, Maurice. Right. That's the one thing you can be certain about. Right. No, people did not expect this today, and that's why you saw, sell-off happening, so much uncertainty in the market. And there's actually this metric that we track about uncertainty. Investors were predicting so much uncertainty over the next 30 days. So no one expected this. And I think right now investors, one actually texted me right before I got on with you, and he said, expect the unexpected. And that is what I'm telling my clients going forward.
Truly. Okay, Kelly, thank you so much. Let's go to Margaret Brennan now. She's in Washington. Margaret, do you have any sense of what led to this moment?
Well, Maurice, in some quick calls I made before coming to speak with you, I was trying to discern exactly that. What I can tell you is that there were two big things that happened today that would be weighing on President Trump's mind. One of them was not just the sell-off in stocks that's been ongoing, but a big shift here when it came to particularly foreign buyers not being very excited about buying U.S. government debt. That short-term debt sale that was supposed to happen, that happens on Wednesday and Thursday, there was a lack of interest from foreign buyers. So not necessarily foreign buyers coming in and selling U.S. government debt, which is how we finance a lot of things in this country, but a concern saying and showing that there is concern about the long-term and short-term economic health of the United States. Two, you also see over on Capitol Hill some concern about getting the president's budget framework through the House of Representatives. We know as of this weekend, the Speaker of the House was trying to voice confidence that he could get this budget framework through. This is the way they can sort of expedite the other plank of the president's economic platform. Remember, he promised all these tax cuts and funding the border and other Republican initiatives. That got harder for him when he saw some members of the Republican Party stand up and say, I don't like what you're doing in my state when it comes to farmers, for example, who are going to be hit by retaliatory tariffs or the fallout from them. So you had two things weighing on the president's mind there. One, the other plank of his economic platform may be in peril because of the sequencing being off since he went into a trade war without moving the other part of his economic platform first. So the votes were a problem. Also, when it came to the market, nervousness. And you can see, we're looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Index there and stocks, but if you look at the debt markets, there was a lot of concern there today. So those are two factors. As one investor said to me, the White House pulled the knife out of their own heart. This wasn't a victory. We did hear from the Treasury Secretary promise of future negotiations with the Japanese and the South Koreans. But CBS reporting to this point is that there isn't really a negotiation underway. There are talks about having talks. So there isn't a deal that was announced here. And when it comes to China, where the Treasury Secretary was saying he's really focused, we don't have any contact at this point.
Okay, Margaret, and as you're speaking there, we see the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, there speaking to reporters outside the White House. If Margaret's still there, I just want to ask you one more question there, Margaret. Can we read anything into the 90 days that the president is going to pause these tariffs? Does 90 days have anything to do with budget negotiations by any chance?
That's an interesting timetable to point to there. In terms of what we knew the expectations were for the votes on those things, that there is the hope that they could get the tax cuts and all that business done by August at the very latest. So the timetables and the sequencing, it's useful to take this off the table is the short answer to your question.
So the trade war between the U.S. and China is only escalating. This morning, China announced it's raising tariffs on U.S. goods to 125%, while the U.S. is digging in its heels. Now, the White House revealed yesterday that imported Chinese goods now face a total tariff of 145%. Chinese leader Xi Jinping met with Spain's prime minister today and called on the EU to stand with Beijing. Chinese state media says Xi wants the bloc to reject unilateral bullying from the U.S. And of course, as you've seen, this back and forth has led to volatility in the markets. This is how the Dow performed over the past week. You see, last Friday, it lost more than 2,000 points. This week, you see things have been in flux, down Monday and Tuesday, up Wednesday, and another drop yesterday. Meanwhile, President Trump has been trying to quell concerns while pointing the finger of blame at other nations.
There'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing. We're doing again what we should have done many years ago. We let it get out of control, and we allowed some countries to get very big and very rich at our expense.
We've got team coverage on this for you this morning. Emily Peck is from Axios and following market sentiment for us. But let's begin with our own Natalie Brand at the White House. Natalie, good morning to you. President Trump seeming confident during that cabinet meeting yesterday, but China saying it will fight to the end as it raises tariffs to 125%. So what is the administration saying about this publicly and behind the scenes?
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see what the White House's official statement on this new escalation is. But that 125% tariff by China takes effect Saturday. Although I want to point out, while China says it will fight to the end, it's also signaling that it may not impose additional levies. In a statement, it says at the current tariff level, U.S. exports to China have no viable market. So if the U.S. continues to impose additional tariffs on Chinese exports, China will no longer respond, though it goes on to say that the U.S. alternately raising abnormally high tariffs on China has become a numbers game which has no practical economic significance and will become a, quote, joke in the history of the world economy. If the U.S. insists on continuing to infringe on Chinese interests, China will resolutely counter and fight to the end. So a lot to unpack in that statement as this kind of tit for tat continues, though we'll have to see how the numbers play out. It is important to note that President Trump has said that he, is waiting for this call from China, that he wants to make a deal. He's also said that he has great respect for Chinese President Xi. The question becomes, when do these leaders actually speak over the phone, communicate, and try to de-escalate these trade tensions?
That's right, Natalie. And while the tension seems to be escalating with China, is there any progress being made with other nations since Trump eliminated the tariffs against those?
Yeah, the White House has said that around 15 countries have made explicit offers to the United States that they are potentially close to trade deals, that these deals are under review, although we don't have exact details or a list of those countries. But we do know that the Treasury Secretary will be meeting with Vietnam's Deputy Prime Minister. Trade advisor Pito Navarro yesterday also listed countries including India, Australia, the UK, the EU, Japan, South Korea, saying that they are all coming in. As we know, the White House has said more than 70 countries have called the United States wanting to strike a deal. But the process ahead, remains pretty intense if you think about all these deals needing to come together within just 3 months. That's the period of the pause on the president's announced reciprocal tariffs. And economic advisor Kevin Hassett said just yesterday that they were having a meeting yesterday to discuss the process ahead. So a lot of details remain to be seen here. And the president saying that if he doesn't get the deals he wants after this 90-day pause, then the tariffs will go back on.
All right. Thanks for setting that all up for us, Natalie Brand at the White House. Let's cross over to Emily Peck now. She's a markets correspondent at Axios. Good morning, Emily. If we listen to what Natalie just laid out, that's a lot of uncertainty. And that's the last thing investors and markets want. So when U.S. markets open in a few hours from now, what are we likely to see considering this China response?
Yeah, great question. We're likely to see more volatility in the markets. That's what we've seen ever since so-called Liberation Day last week when President Trump first announced his reciprocal tariffs. Markets have gone down and then up and then down and then up and then down again. This morning, the futures markets are looking upbeat, actually. There's been bank earnings out. JP Morgan reported earnings and they look good. So the markets are a little happy about that, but nothing's guaranteed right now. These markets are seeing extreme volatility and no one really expects that to change in the near future.
Now, one data point I see a lot of analysts pointing to is the bond yield rate. Give us a breakdown of how the bond market is responding to all this turbulence and why it is a barometer President Trump is likely paying attention to.
Yeah, the bond market is really interesting. Everyone pays attention to U.S. Treasuries. Those are the bonds that we sell to other investors, give us money, lend us money at typically very low rates, and they're considered very safe investments. Typically in moments of world crisis or extreme volatility, investors will buy more Treasury bonds, which lowers their prices and raises their interest rates. But that's not what happened here when the U.S. started monkeying with tariffs, causing a lot of uncertainty and triggering a crisis. There was a sell-off in U.S. Treasuries, and no one is exactly sure why, but the worry is that's because investors weren't looking to the U.S. as a safe harbor, but are instead trying to shed U.S. assets in search of something a little more certain.
President Trump says he's spoken with Chinese President Xi Jinping, quote, numerous times on tariffs, but he was vague about if he's spoken with him since the trade war broke out. Beijing has denied any negotiations are currently underway and have called for abolishing unilateral tariffs. Now, the uncertainty has put the U.S. stock market on a roller coaster these past few weeks. You're looking at a live look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average right now. It was in green for most of the week, but as you see this morning, it is in the red, pulling back about 170 points. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is at the New York Stock Exchange for us this morning. Kelly, great to see you. How is Wall Street digesting the changing headlines on tariffs between China and the U.S.?
Minute by minute, Errol, just like the rest of us. You mentioned the Dow. I've actually got a big board over here that I can kind of see all the indexes. At the NYSE, each of them are down about 0.5% to 1%. Not that much. I think right now you're kind of seeing investors digest the back and forth. President Trump saying that there have been negotiations and calls with China, China coming out and saying that there haven't been. Of course, we also heard from the president yesterday, or rather Besant yesterday, that there may be a deal with South Korea next week. So what I would say is right now Wall Street is digesting things minute by minute. I spoke to a few traders this morning to take their temperature, and they said the same thing. On a Friday at the New York Stock Exchange, things can change very quickly, especially since we have some consumer sentiment data coming out.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Kelly, China seems to be digging in week by week. Overnight, it canceled some U.S. shipments of pork. Last week, we saw the cancellation of Boeing aircraft from the U.S. Help us understand, if you can, what's behind this recent move surrounding pork and how that could impact farmers in the U.S.
So this is more retaliation. You know, we have seen the actual tariffs reach such a high percentage. Remember, the United States has a 145% tariff on China. China has a 125% tariff on the U.S. It is not sustainable where it is right now, but to keep moving that higher and higher. So you are seeing China take other steps to retaliate. This most recent shipment of canceling, I believe it was 12,000 metric tons of pork. That is the highest cancellation that we have seen from China since back in COVID, when there were all those supply chain disruptions. In terms of what it means for U.S. farmers, it's not good. China is the third largest market for the U.S., and so it is very important for these farmers to continue to have access to these markets. But remember, the last time around during the first Trump administration, this technique, this retaliation, really hurt the American agriculture and farming industry to the point where the government did need to step in and give them subsidies. So we haven't reached that point yet, but another escalation from Beijing, Errol.
Yeah, we'll keep watching all this closely. Kelly O'Grady on the trading floor, just on a balcony above. Thanks so much. For more on Trump's trade war with China, let's cross over now to White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, good morning to you. So fact check everything for us. President Trump says he has been speaking with Xi. China says we are not currently speaking directly. So where do negotiations stand today?
Hey there, Errol. Good to be with you on this Friday morning. Well, the president, as you mentioned, said that he is, in fact, communicating with the Chinese in terms of that trade standoff that both nations really just haven't budged quite yet. We've seen those tariffs, as Kelly and you were talking about, go up to 145% on the U.S. side, 125% on the Chinese side. But the president talked about this a little bit ago before he left for Rome. Take a listen to what he said.
I think the tariff plan is doing very well. We're resetting the table. We're going to make our country very rich, very, very rich. It's already happening.
And the president wouldn't elaborate in further detail as to when or if he spoke with President Xi of China. Remember, the Chinese say that negotiations aren't happening. They are essentially saying that those leader-level conversations aren't happening, but the White House maintains that they're moving forward with those negotiations. On top of that, we have talks with other nations, including South Korea. Kelly mentioned South Korea as well. We just got a statement from the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and it essentially said that those technical conversations will play out next week with South Korea, so we could potentially see some movement there. On top of that, you have another Asian nation, Vietnam, that is moving closer to negotiations. Well, I should say negotiations are ongoing, but closer to working out a deal with the United States. So it's not just China, but of course, hundreds of other nations that the White House has to work out a deal with, because President Trump has announced those reciprocal tariffs basically on all U.S. trading partners. He was talking about that yesterday with Norway. Although in the case of Norway, Errol, the president says that they have a trade surplus with the United States. So perhaps no hard feelings there with the nation of Norway.